You open a bakery? Come on, be serious for once." The laughter echoed around the dinner table, each chuckle a tiny dagger. I sat there, fork frozen midair, my cheeks burning, as the people who were supposed to love me, my mother, my father, my sister, even my younger brother, shared a joke at my expense. The joke, of course, was me. All I had said was, "I think I'm ready to open my own bakery." That was it. A simple sentence. My dream, offered up like a gift. And they trampled it. My mother wiped her mouth delicately with a napkin and said, "Darling, dreams are lovely, but dreams don't pay rent. Especially ones that taste like sugar." My father added, "You should be thinking about a real job. Something with health insurance." And my sister, Danielle, flawless, polished Danielle, who worked at a bank and got praised for breathing, looked at me with pity. "It's cute, you're still into that baking thing." That baking thing. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just smiled. That tight, fragile smile women are taught to wear like armor. I pushed my food around my plate and pretended I wasn't falling apart inside. You ever have a moment where you realize you're completely alone in a room full of people who claim they love you? Yeah, that was mine. They always liked to pretend they were supportive. Like when I was a kid and used to bake cupcakes after school, they'd say things like, "Oh, that's nice, honey." But then scoff when I said I wanted to go to culinary school. They were the kind of family that believed in respectable careers: doctor, lawyer, finance, definitely not pastry chef. When I graduated college with a communications degree, I didn't care about because they said baking wasn't serious. I remember Danielle throwing a party. When she got promoted, Mom posted about it all over Facebook. When I got a little part-time job frosting cupcakes at a local cafe, not a word. Not even a good job. They made it clear that I was a disappointment they tolerated, as if I had failed some invisible exam only they had written. So when I sat at that dinner table, all grown up, and said that I wanted to take the leap, rent a tiny space, sell my own creations, make a name for myself, I wasn't just sharing a dream. I was reaching out, asking for someone to say, "Yes, you can." But no one did. That night, after dinner, I went back to my studio apartment, noisy pipes, flickering light, but mine, and I cried. I cried not just because they laughed at me. I cried because for a second, just one tiny second, I had hoped they would say, "We're proud of you." And instead, all I heard was laughter. Their laughter haunted me for days. In the silence of my kitchen, when I was testing recipes, in the quiet moments before sleep, when the doubts crept in, they had no idea what it took for me to even speak those words out loud. You think it's easy to declare a dream that no one believes in. It's not. It's terrifying. But here's the thing they didn't know. I wasn't asking for permission. Their laughter didn't stop. MIT lit a fire. I started working 2 jobs. By day, I sat in an office, answering phones, scheduling meetings, smiling through it all. By night, I baked brownies, eclairs, croissants that took 6 hours to layer and chill. My kitchen was a war zone of butter and hope. I signed up for a midnight course in professional baking. I used my weekends to sell at a local farmer's market. I burned myself more times than I could count. Slept 3 hours a night. Missed birthdays and brunches, though. Let's be honest, no one noticed. I wasn't just baking, I was building. Brick by invisible brick, I was constructing a life no one believed I could have. And yet, even as orders began trickling in from friends of friends, even when I got my first Instagram post to go viral, my family said nothing. Danielle once said, "You still doing that baking thing?" Like I was playing dress up in a career made of frosting. I smiled. "Yes, and people are paying for it." She nodded, distracted. "Well, if it makes you happy, I guess." That's the thing about people who never believed in you. Even when the proof is right in front of them, they look away. Because if they admit you made it, they'd have to admit they were wrong. But I kept going. Not for them. For me. For the little girl who used to bake alone because the kitchen was the only place she felt in control. For the young woman who worked through tears and exhaustion just to have a slice of dignity. You ever fight for something no one else sees? That's where real strength comes from. So no, their laughter didn't crush me. It clarified things. They saw a joke. I saw the beginning of a story. They laughed at the prologue. They hadn't seen the climax yet. And trust me, when they did, they wouldn't be laughing. I wish I could tell you that after that night, I stopped hoping for their approval. But the truth, hope dies slow. Even after they laughed, even after they dismissed me. I still found myself checking my phone after every cake post, waiting for a text from mom, a thumbs up from Danielle, a looks great, proud of you, from dad. Nothing. I told myself I didn't care, but I did. I cared when I stayed up until 3 a.m. piping flowers onto a wedding cake for a stranger and woke up 3 hours later to get to the cafe for my shift. I cared when I finally saved enough to buy my own stand mixer instead of borrowing my neighbor's. I cared because somewhere inside me, buried beneath all that frosting and fatigue, was a girl still craving to be seen. But all I got from them was silence. Well, silence and the occasional passive-aggressive reminder that I was wasting my time. One Sunday afternoon, we had a family lunch. I brought a fresh batch of lemon lavender scones, boxed neatly in white paper, tied with a ribbon. My attempt to bridge the gap. A peace offering made of flour and sugar. Danielle took one, bit into it, then said, not bad. A bit too floral. For me. Mom didn't even try one. Dad said, you brought dessert. That's sweet, but we already have pie from Costco. Costco. That was the real punchline. I watched them pass the plastic pie around while my homemade scones sat untouched. It wasn't about the scones. It was about the message. You're not enough. I could have screamed. Instead, I smiled and took the box back home with me. A dozen untouched dreams. I ate 2 on the bus ride home. Cold, crumbling, and bitter, not from the lemon, but from the disappointment. You know what nobody tells you about chasing dreams? It's lonely. It's not the kind of loneliness that comes from being alone. It's the kind that comes from being surrounded by people who don't believe in you. I worked 16-hour days. Baking at night, working admin in the day, running 2 deliveries on my lunch breaks. I couldn't afford a car, so I biked in the rain with boxes strapped to the back. One time, I dropped an entire custom birthday cake outside an office building. I sat on the curb, covered in frosting, and cried so hard I couldn't breathe. But I got up, wiped my face, and baked another one before sunrise. I did this not for their applause, but to prove to myself that I could. Still, in the quiet moments when the batter was in the oven, and the kitchen lights hummed softly, I'd sometimes whisper, out loud, do they even see me? Money was tight. I stretched every dollar. I skipped meals, skipped birthdays, skipped sleep. I remember needing just $800 to take an advanced baking course that would teach me how to make the kinds of wedding cakes people fly across the country for. I asked my parents, not for a gift, alone. I had spreadsheets, a payment plan. Mom said, we don't have that kind of money lying around. 2 weeks later, she posted vacation photos from Tuscany. Danielle bought a new couch. Dad got new golf clubs. But for me, nothing. Even my little brother, Jason, who used to sit beside me in the kitchen licking cake batter off the spoon, shrugged. You're still trying that bakery thing. That bakery thing, it followed me like a ghost, but I kept going. Because failure wasn't an option. Because I'd already seen what settling looked like, and I refused to shrink just to fit their expectations. And then one day something changed. It started small. A woman ordered a dozen cupcakes for her daughter's birthday. I decorated them like little fairy gardens, hand-painted fondant wings, edible glitter, piped ROSEBUDS. She posted a photo online, tagged me. I woke up to 76 new followers. Then 200. Then 1,000. Suddenly, people were diming me. Can you do a wedding cake? Do you deliver to Connecticut? Do you ship nationwide? I didn't sleep that weekend. I didn't eat much either, but I cried when I realized I'd booked every weekend for the next month. I cried because finally, someone saw me, and it wasn't my family. It was strangers. Funny how sometimes the people who know the least about you end up believing in you, more than the ones who raised you. Still, I didn't tell my family, not yet. Because deep down, I knew what they'd say. They'd find a way to belittle it. To make it small. To remind me that success only counted when it came in a pantsuit with a 401k. So I kept my wins quiet. I saved every dollar. I took that course, paid for it in full, in cash. I learned techniques that put me in a whole new league. And slowly, orders turned into clients. Clients turned into fans. And my tiny kitchen became too small for what I was building. I started searching for storefronts. Late one night, sitting in my apartment surrounded by boxes of packaging. Invoices, buttercream stains on my shirt, I whispered. They're going to see, they're going to know. Not because I needed them to anymore, but because I deserved to be seen. Because even if they never gave me their blessing, I was going to build something so sweet, so undeniable that their silence would turn into stunned awe. Let them laugh. I was just getting started. I signed the lease on a 400-square-foot corner space that smelled like bleach and regret. It had been a failed nail salon, the walls still stained with chipped pink paint and sadness. There was no kitchen, no counter, just a flickering fluorescent light and a broken sink. But it was mine. I stood in the center of that dusty room and whispered, "This is where it begins." I didn't tell my family. Part of me wanted to. I imagined calling my mom and saying, "Guess what? I got the shop." I imagined the hesitation in her voice, the loaded pause before a lackluster, "Oh, that's nice, no thanks." I wouldn't give them the opportunity to shrink this for me. The next few months were brutal. I poured everything into that space: money, sweat, skin from my fingertips. Dreams too heavy for one heart to carry. I worked my day job, ran deliveries on the weekends, and spent every night transforming that cursed salon into a bakery. I scraped floors, painted walls, learned how to install cabinets from YouTube tutorials. I made mistakes, costly ones, like trusting a friend of a friend to install plumbing. Spoiler, he didn't. I lost a week and $600, but I kept going. I baked in the middle of the night at a shared commercial kitchen I rented by the hour because health codes, of course. I slept in shifts, ate standing up, laughed at the absurdity of what I was doing, but God, I was alive. Do you know what it feels like to finally be moving in the direction of your dream? It hurts, but it also heals. I was exhausted, yes, but for the first time in years, I wasn't small. Opening day came faster than I expected. The night before, I stood in my little shop, staring at the display fridge empty, the counter gleaming, the air thick with sugar and fear. I didn't know if anyone would show up. I posted about the grand opening online, made flyers, reached out to a few local bloggers, but I had no PR team, no marketing budget, just me, and the smell of vanilla. I hardly slept that night. When morning came, I put on my apron like armor, tied my hair back like I was going into battle, and opened the door. There was a line. I blinked. A line. It wrapped halfway down the block. People, smiling, holding coffee cups, wearing sunglasses, and curiosity. I nearly cried right then. Some came because they'd seen my posts. Others because of a cupcake their friend brought to work. One woman said, "I've never heard of you, but your cakes look like art." I sold out in 3 hours. I sat on the floor afterward, sugar crusted to my skin, and laughed until I cried. Because it was real. Because I did it. Because they weren't there to see it. That night, I posted a photo of the sold-out sign on my social media with the caption, "First day, all gone. Thank you." My phone lit up for hours, not from my family of course. From strangers, friends, former co-workers who said they always knew I could do it. Even my landlord commented, "Didn't think you'd pull it off." Glad to be wrong. But not a single message from mom or dad. Danielle saw the post, she'd liked it but didn't say a word, and still, a part of me waited. Because that's what we do, isn't it? Wait for the ones who doubted us to finally look us in the eye and say, "You were right." But that day didn't come. Not yet. Weeks passed, and the bakery stayed busy. People placed custom orders for baby showers, engagement parties, retirement celebrations. A food blogger called my hummingbird cake sinful and transcendent. A couple drove 3 hours for my macarons. I hired a part-time helper, Lena, a culinary student with a fierce work ethic and bright eyes. She reminded me of me, years ago, except no one was laughing at her, because I wouldn't let them. I paid my bills on time. I made rent early. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I was building, and yet despite all that I still wasn't enough for them. One evening, during a lull, I got a text from Jason, my little brother. "Heard your bakery is doing well? Danielle mentioned it. Congrats." That was it. No emojis, no warmth, just distant recognition. Still, it was more than I'd gotten from anyone else in the family. I replied, "Thanks. You should come by sometime." He didn't answer. A few days later, Danielle posted about her promotion, something about head of client solutions. The comments were full of praise. Mom even reposted it with the caption, "So proud of my brilliant daughter." I stared at the post for a long time. Not because I begrudged her success, but because I had worked twice as hard, built something from nothing, and all I got was silence. They didn't see me. Maybe they never would. That night, I went back to the bakery and turned on the lights. The soft hum of the refrigerator. The glow of the display case. I walked through the space I had created, every tile laid by hand. every recipe born from failure and fire. And I whispered to the air, "You don't have to see me. You don't have to clap. You don't have to call." Because I knew what I had done. And one day, they'd walk into a party, a wedding, a gala, and bite into something sweet. And someone would say, "Oh, it's from her." And they'd feel it. That tightening in the chest, the moment they'd realize what they laughed at had become something unstoppable. The first wedding cake I ever made was for a stranger named Megan. She'd found me through a tagged photo. A friend of a friend had ordered a dozen cupcakes for a birthday brunch, and Megan had seen the delicate sugar daisies I'd piped by hand. She messaged me 2 weeks later with a question I never expected: "Would you be willing to do my wedding cake?" I read the message 4 times. My fingers trembled. Not because I didn't know how to do it. I'd practiced wedding designs in the quiet of night for months, but because this was the first time someone had trusted me with something monumental. Someone who didn't know my past. Someone who hadn't heard my mother say, "It's just a hobby," or watched my sister raise an eyebrow like baking was a phase I'd age out of. This woman saw my work and saw value. Megan wanted a reptered buttercream cake with fresh peonies and a hand-painted watercolor effect in shades of blush and gold. I spent nights sketching designs, comparing peony varieties, testing frostings until my taste buds were numb. I charged her half of what it was worth. Not because I undervalued myself, but because I needed the chance more than the money. The night before the wedding, I barely slept. I baked each layer twice, terrified something would go wrong. I transported it carefully, tear-wrapped, secured with dowels. My heartbeat a steady drumbeat of "Don't mess this up." When I arrived at the venue, a beautiful barn-turned-ball of the coordinators looked at me, then at the cake box, and said, "Oh, you're the baker." I smiled. "Yes, ma'am." She raised an eyebrow. "You look young." I didn't flinch. I was used to that, but then she helped me carry the cake inside. And when I unveiled it, she gasped, This is stunning." Megan cried when she saw it. She hugged me, held my hands, and said, "You have no idea how special this is to me." In that moment, the late nights, the burns, the missed calls, it all faded, because here was a bride, on the most important day of her life, trusting me with the centerpiece of her celebration. And I had delivered. She posted a photo, tagged me, wrote, "Made by a small but mighty bakery in Brooklyn. Support women who build from scratch." That post changed everything. It got shared and reshared. I gained 500 followers in 2 days. Within a week, I had 3 more wedding inquiries. Then 2 more for engagement parties. Then, a corporate event cake for a local design agency. People were finding me, not because I paid for ads, not because I had connections, but because I made something real. And the real has a way of rising like yeast under just the right heat. Meanwhile, my family still said nothing. I saw them for Dad's birthday dinner. Danielle had picked the restaurant, some overpriced steakhouse with dim lighting and white tablecloths. Everyone was dressed like it was a board meeting. I came straight from the bakery, flowers still under my fingernails. I handed Dad a small cake box, chocolate espresso with salted caramel filling his favorite, even though he'd never admit I remembered. He opened it, smiled politely. "Oh, nice." Danielle made a joke about sugar and cholesterol. Mom asked if I'd ever thought of going back to school to get a real degree. Jason scrolled through his phone. No one asked about the bakery. Not a single word. I sat there, smiling like my heart wasn't curling in on itself. Let me tell you something. There's a special kind of grief that comes from being invisible in front of the people who are supposed to see you first. I paid for my own dinner. Didn't say goodbye. When I got home, I opened my laptop and found a new email. Subject: Cake request, 80th birthday message. "My grandmother saw your wedding cake online and said she hadn't seen something so beautiful since Paris in 1964. Can we order something just like it?" I smiled, then I cried. Because it always came from them. The strangers, the outsiders, the ones who didn't know the way my mother wrinkled her nose when I brought dessert to family events. Or how Danielle could ruin my entire day with one dismissive blink. They didn't carry that. They just saw the cake. And the woman who made it, so I said yes. Of course I did, and I poured everything into that cake. Not just flour and sugar, but the need to be seen. I painted delicate Parisian roses across fondant. Added flecks of 24,000 gold leaf. Hand-cut sugar-laced rim. It took 19 hours. The woman's granddaughter sent me a video, her grandmother, mouth wide in wonder, tears in her eyes, whispering, "It's perfect. It's art." I played that video over and over that night, lying on the bakery floor, back aching. Icing on my jeans. No one in my family had ever said my work was art. But this woman, this 80-year-old stranger, she did. And it meant the world. That month, I booked more orders than I could fulfill alone, so I hired another part-time baker, Marcus, a single dad who used to be a pastry chef before he lost his job during the pandemic. We bonded over burnt sugar and broken families. He didn't laugh at dreams. He understood the cost of building something from the ground up. We worked side by side in the tiny kitchen. Sometimes in silence, sometimes humming along to Ella Fitzgerald. And in those moments, I realized something. I was no longer alone. I had built not just a bakery but a life. One where kindness, creativity, and quiet resilience were baked into every crumb. And yet, even with all of that, even with the orders, the praise, the partnerships, the brides and grandmothers, there was still a part of me that looked at my phone at night, hoping for a message from Mom, or Dad, or Danielle, a simple, "We saw your work, we're proud," but nothing came, so I whispered to myself, like a vow, one day, you won't need them to say it, because they'll see it on a screen, in someone's hands, in the smile of a stranger biting into a dream they never believed in, and when that moment came, they'd finally understand that I wasn't the joke at the dinner table anymore. I was the one who got the last bite. The invitation came on a Wednesday morning. I remember it vividly because I'd just dropped a tray of cream puffs and burned the side of my palm trying to catch them. I was icing my hand with a bag of frozen peas when I heard the ding on my phone. Subject, segment, opportunity. Local business spotlight. Channel 7 morning show message. We love your story and your work. Would you be willing to appear live next week for a feature on women entrepreneurs in the food industry? I stared at the screen, blinking. For a second, I thought it was spam. Then I clicked the sender's name and saw it, Rachel Torres, Senior Producer. My heart stumbled in my chest. I said yes. Of course, I said yes. Then I sat down in the middle of the kitchen floor and whispered, oh my God. I didn't tell my family. Not yet, because somehow, I knew it would matter more if they found out the way the rest of the world did. The days leading up to the interview were a whirlwind. I practiced how to say I built this from nothing without my voice shaking. I picked out the cleanest apron I had, straightened my hair, and rehearsed answers in the mirror, hoping I wouldn't freeze under the studio lights. When I arrived at the station, the host bright-smiled and high-heeled greeted me like I was already somebody. You're the cake artist, right? We love your Instagram. That wedding cake with the marble swirls. Stunning. She introduced me as the face behind Brooklyn's most buzzed-about bakery and asked me to talk about the challenges of starting from scratch. I told them about late nights and flour under my nails, about hauling cakes across the city on the subway. I spoke about rejection, about building without backing, about the people who told me I was dreaming too small because they didn't see the size of my hunger. And then when she asked what kept me going, I looked straight into the camera and said, sometimes the best kind of success is the quiet kind. The kind no one sees coming. The kind that makes the people who doubted you stop laughing. She raised an eyebrow. Sounds personal. I smiled. The segment aired the next day. I posted the clip on my page with a single caption, proof that flour and fire can build more than bread. Within hours, my phone was a riot of notifications. Hundreds of comments, orders, messages from people saying they saw themselves in me. Former classmates I hadn't spoken to in years reached out. One wrote, I always knew you'd be big. But what caught me off guard wasn't the strangers. It was my sister. She texted me at 3:17 p.m., saw you on TV. You looked different, like actually confident. Cool, segment. That was her version of a compliment. I stared at the message like it was written in another language. Then came one from Jason. Mom's been replaying your interview. Just thought you should know. I didn't reply, not right away. I just sat on the bakery steps, sunlight spilling over the sidewalk, the smell of vanilla in the air, and let the moment sit. They saw me not in the way I had begged for years ago, not in some forced family dinner, not through gritted praise. They saw me because the world saw me, and suddenly, they had no choice. A few days later, I got a call. Hey sweetie, it's Mom. I hadn't heard her voice since Dad's birthday dinner, the one where they ignored my cake like it was invisible. I saw you on the news. That was something. Her tone hovered in that strange space between awe and caution. I stayed quiet. I didn't realize you were doing so well, she added. Why didn't you tell us? I almost laughed. Tell you. when every attempt had been met with silence, condescension, or worse. But I didn't fight. Not this time. I've been busy, I said. Building things. A pause. Well, your father and I were thinking of stopping by the shop sometime. Maybe we could pick up a birthday cake for your Aunt Lucille. She's turning 70. There it was. The shift. They weren't coming to support me. They were coming because now, suddenly, I was useful. I could provide something. Impress people. Make them look good. I could feel my chest tighten. Sorry, I said slowly. I'm booked out for the next 2 months. You'll have to order ahead. A beat of silence. Then oh. I didn't realize you were that busy. I hung up and sat in the kitchen, my phone still in hand. And for the first time in years, I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't aching for their praise. I just felt clear. They had seen me now, but it wasn't because they'd suddenly opened their hearts. It was because the world had forced them to. They had been handed the truth on a silver screen, and now they wanted to act like they'd believed in me all along, but they hadn't. And I wouldn't let them rewrite the story just because the ending was sweet. That night, Lena brought in cupcakes she'd decorated to celebrate the TV segment. She'd piped tiny edible microphones on top and written she believed she could. So she baked in frosting on the box. We popped open sparkling cider and toasted with sugar-covered fingers. You're kind of famous now, she teased. Should we start screening calls? I smiled. No, let them call. Because here's the thing, you can ignore someone's dream for years, but once that dream walks into the light and shines, you don't get to claim it. You don't get to say you helped it grow when all you ever did was try to keep it small. 3 months after the TV segment aired, the orders didn't just pick up, they exploded. I had a wait list for wedding cakes. Clients were flying in from out of state. Corporations started sending inquiries about branded desserts. Even a fashion house in Soho reached out about a limited edition couture cupcake line for their anniversary. But the moment that truly flipped the balance was when they came knocking. It started with a message from Danielle. Hey, random question. Could you squeeze in a birthday cake for Ava next weekend? Ava, her daughter. My niece. She'd turned 5 last year and I wasn't invited to the party. The theme had been princesses. I'd offered to make a castle cake covered in spun sugar and edible glitter and Danielle said, "We've already hired a professional." Now, a year later, I was somehow professional enough for a last-minute favor. I looked at the calendar. I was booked solid, so I replied, "Sorry, I'm booked through the next 10 weeks. Clients are reserving months ahead now." She left me on read for 2 days. Then came the group family chat. Mom, just checking if everyone's free Saturday for Ava's birthday. We'll do cake at 3. Danielle, I still haven't found a good bakery. The decent ones are either overpriced or fully booked. And then this. Mom, didn't Rachel say she bakes cakes now? Now. I stared at the screen like it had slapped me. It wasn't just the dismissal, it was the sudden amnesia. Like they hadn't spent years treating my passion like a quirky phase. Like they hadn't watched me bleed for this and still acted like I was playing pretend. So I wrote back. Short and clear. I do. But like I said, I'm booked. Happy birthday to Ava. A minute passed, then 2. Danielle, wow, guess you're really leaning into this whole boss lady attitude lately? Mom, well, I just think family should support each other. That one stung because where was that sentiment when I needed $800 for culinary school? Where was it when they laughed in my face over dinner? When they passed around Costco pie and ignored my homemade scones? I put down the phone and stared at the ceiling. They didn't want my cake. They wanted my success now that it could be used as a prop. To impress party guests. To pad the family image. Not because they were proud. Because it made them look good. I didn't go to Ava's birthday party. And I didn't send cake. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty about that. Instead, I stood in my shop that weekend and watched a bride-to-be cry tears of joy over her engagement cake. Instead, I signed the lease for the unit next door, beginning expansion plans. Instead, I trained Lena to manage weekend orders and hired Marcus full-time. Instead, I did what I'd always done, worked, built, believed. A few days after the party, Jason came by the bakery. I didn't expect him. He walked in with his hands in his jacket pockets, looked around like the place might bite him, then said, "This is bigger than I expected." I wiped flour off my apron and raised an eyebrow. "Didn't realize you had expectations." He half smiled. "You're not the only one who watches TV, you know." I laughed. "Did Mom send you?" He shrugged. She's confused. Doesn't really get how all this happened without her noticing. I leaned against the counter. She noticed. She just didn't care to ask. Jason nodded, silent for a moment. Then, Danielle's still pissed about the cake. Not my problem. Yeah, I told her she had 2 years to support you and chose not to. Can't act surprised now. I blinked. Jason, of all people, was standing up for me. He rubbed the back of his neck. Look, I didn't always get it either. Thought you were just, I don't know, playing house with flour. But now, I see it. You made something real. I swallowed hard. Then he looked up at me and said, You didn't owe them that cake, Ratch. You don't owe them anything. And just like that, the tightness in my chest I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying eased. Because finally someone in my family saw it. Not the cakes, not the sales. Me. Later that night, after closing up, I opened the back door to let in some air. The sky was a deep violet, the street quiet. I sat on the stoop with a cup of tea, the warmth seeping into my hands. For so long, I'd waited for them to come around. To see me, to validate me. But this new chapter. It wasn't about their applause. It was about my boundaries, about protecting the girl who once whispered dreams into silence. You see, the people who mock your beginnings will often want a piece of your ending. They'll show up when the camera's rolling, when the applause is loud, when your name means something, but by then, it's not their table anymore. They laughed when I said I'd open a bakery. Now they're learning, if you want a seat at my table, you better call 3 months in advance. Success tastes sweet, yes, but only when you've earned it with salt by summer. The bakery was more than just a shop, it was a movement. People didn't just come for cakes. They came for me. For my story. For the girl who got laughed out of a dining room and built a wait list out of spite and sugar. But success also attracts a particular type of visitor. The ones who think they're owed a discount. The ones who only remember your name when it looks good on theirs. And of course, family. Mom started dropping by on Thursdays, never called. Never texted ahead. Just showed up. The first time she pretended it was just in the neighborhood. The second time, she brought a Tupperware of her famous lemon bars, dry, clumsy things that tasted like forgotten birthdays. I smiled politely, even offered her coffee, but I didn't let her into the kitchen. That space was sacred. Instead, we sat by the front window, where customers couldn't hear, and she asked casual questions with pointed undertones. So, how much do you really make from these little cakes? You must be exhausted all the time. Wouldn't it be easier to just work for someone? You're not dating anyone, are you? I mean, with all this work. Each question wasn't curiosity, it was surveillance. Like she was taking notes for a family report card I'd never signed up for. I wanted to scream. Instead, I said, Mom, if you're here to check in, but don't pretend it's something else. She blinked, caught off guard. I just want to make sure you're okay. I leaned in, voice calm. You had 10 years to ask me that. You chose not to. She looked wounded, as if I'd thrown something. But I was done babysitting her comfort. The boundary conversation came 2 weeks later. She brought Dad. They showed up together, like a united front, as if togetherness could erase years of condescension. Dad barely said much, just stood there, arms crossed, surveying the place like he was evaluating drywall. Mom did the talking. Rachel, honey, we know you're busy, but the family's been talking. I put down my spatula slowly. That's never good. Danielle's upset about Ava, and Jason feels like you're being distant lately. We're just worried you're holding on to things. I laughed. I actually laughed. Am I holding on, or did I finally put something down? You're different lately. I'm the same. You're just not used to seeing me with boundaries. She flinched. We're trying, Rachel. You could try, too. I took a deep breath. I tried. For years. I tried to be easy, to be quiet, to make things smooth for everyone. But that version of Mishi was miserable. She cried in walk-in freezers and stayed up all night baking apology cookies. I buried her so this version of me could live. They didn't respond. I continued. You don't get to decide when I've healed enough. You don't get to show up now that I'm successful and act like we're a team. So what, you're just cutting us off? I stared at them. No, I'm cutting off access. You don't get free cake and emotional labor just because we share DNA. Silence. Then Dad finally spoke. I hope you don't let this attitude ruin you. I looked at him, steady and unblinking. I hope you don't let pride blind you too. The daughter you almost lost. They left. The bell above the door chimed behind them. And I didn't cry. Not this time. Support came from places I never expected. Marcus, my head baker, started calling me boss queen behind my back. I let him. Lena bought me a plaque that said she believed she could, so she baked it happen. Even Mrs. Holloway, the elderly woman from the flower shop next door, began leaving me fresh blooms each Monday morning, just because. And then there were the strangers. One afternoon, a teenage girl came in with her mom, quiet, polite. She ordered a cupcake, then stood awkwardly by the counter, like she had something stuck in her throat. Finally, she said, "I saw you on TV. My uncle says baking isn't a real job, but you make it look like it is." I leaned forward, softened my voice. "What's your name?" "Jenna." "Well, Jenna," I said, handing her a second cupcake on the house, "let me tell you something. When you're good at something, and you love it, that's already real. Everyone else is just catching up." She beamed. Her mom mouthed, "Thank you." I stood there a moment after they left, staring out the window. That was the real payoff, not the headlines, not the bookings. Not even the shocked look on Danielle's face when she found out her kid would have to settle for supermarket frosting. It was this. Being who I needed at 17 for someone else. I learned something that year. Sometimes, your family won't be the ones cheering you on. Sometimes, the people who should have watered your dreams are the first to laugh when you plant them. But that doesn't mean you were wrong to dream. It just means you're strong enough to grow. In spite of it, and when the fruit finally comes, you have every right to choose who gets a slice. You want to know when everything changed. It wasn't when the bakery hit 6 figures. It wasn't the magazine article. It wasn't even when a celebrity tagged my cake on Instagram. It was a wedding. Not mine, of course. It was Danielle's daughter Eva, the niece I used to babysit, the one I bought glitter pens for when no one remembered her birthday. She was getting married, and she wanted me to make the cake. But not as her aunt, as Rachel of Sugar House Bakery. That's how the email came in. Professional, formal, like we weren't family. Like I hadn't been laughed out of that same dining room where the engagement party was now being held. I stared at it for a long time. "Hi Rachel, Ava would love if you could make her wedding cake. We know your schedules. Tight, we'd be happy to pay your full rate. Let us know if that's possible." Danielle, there was no hi, sis. No apology, no memory of the last argument, or the years of silence. Just a transaction. I said yes, not because I needed their money. Not because I forgave them, but because this was my arena now, and I wanted to walk into it with my head high and my hands dusted and powdered. Sugar power. Ava's theme was whimsical garden. I built a 5-tiered masterpiece: elderflower sponge, lemon curd, Swiss meringue buttercream, delicate pressed violets curled around sugar-blown bubbles. The top tier held a tiny replica of her dog, carved in white chocolate. And when I walked into that ballroom, wheeling the cake on its crystal base, every head turned. And there they were, my family. Frozen. Danielle's jaw went slack. She rushed over, eyes wide. "Oh my God, Rachel, this is unbelievable." I gave her a tight smile. "That's why I have a waitlist." She laughed nervously. "You really made it, huh?" I didn't answer. Ava hugged me. "Thank you so much, Aunt Rachel. I told Mom I had to have you." Something in my chest cracked open. Ava remembered, and not just the fame. She remembered me. The reception was full of people I barely recognized. And yet, everyone seemed to know who I was. One guest whispered, "You're the cake artist everyone's been talking about." Another asked for a selfie. One woman told me she drove an hour just to try my almond tort at the tasting. Danielle watched all of it with a tight smile, eyes darting. Later, while I was packing my tools, she came over, holding a glass of rose like it was a peace treaty. "I didn't realize you'd gotten this big." "Yeah," I said. Funny what someone can do when they're not being ridiculed over dinner. Her face tightened. "Look, I know we've had history, but we're still family." I nodded. Slowly, "We are. But family doesn't always mean access." "What does that mean?" "It means you're not entitled to me anymore, to my time, my craft, my forgiveness." She opened her mouth, closed it, then softer. "Ava was right to ask you. You're amazing." "I always was," I said. "You just weren't looking." Later that night, after the cake had been devoured, and the music faded into drunken laughter, I stood by the back doors of the venue. The summer air was soft. The stars spilled like flour across the sky. Dad stepped out, hands in his pockets. He didn't say much at first. Then, "You ever think about coming back around more? To the family?" I took a breath. "Only if I'm coming back as myself. Not the version you all preferred. You always were stubborn." "I had to be. You made it the only way to survive." He looked down. "You've done well." "I've done," I said. "No thanks to any of you." He nodded. Didn't argue. Just walked away. I drove home with the windows down. My hands still smelled like sugar and lemon zest. My heart was still beating with the quiet thunder of vindication. This wasn't just success. It was justice, and no one could take it from me. Not even those who shared my blood. Here's what I've learned. In case you're someone who needs to hear it, you don't owe access to anyone who laughed at your dreams. You don't have to keep bleeding just to keep the peace. And you sure as hell don't have to serve your cake to those who tried to starve you of belief. Forgiveness is earned, not assumed. And family. Family is not the people who watch you rise so they can claim they knew you when. It's the people who held you steady when you still had flour in your hair and doubt in your chest. So bake for them, build for them, and for yourself. Always for yourself. After Ava's wedding, the emails started coming. Not from clients, those I was used to. These were from family. Danielle wanted to catch up over brunch. Mom asked if I could stop by next Sunday. Even Jake, the brother, who once told me baking was a nice hobby, but not a future, texted, asking if I'd make his wife's birthday cake. No, not asking dash expecting. As if the wedding had flipped a switch, and now I was palatable again. Now that success wrapped around me like frosting on a perfect tear. They could acknowledge me. They never said sorry. They didn't ask about the years I'd struggled. They didn't want to know how many nights I cried in my car after selling cupcakes no one bought. What they wanted was access to the glow, to the spotlight, to me, now that I was something they could show off at dinner parties. And God, it stung. Because part of me still wanted to say yes, still wanted to be invited, included, accepted. But that part of me, she was younger. She still thought love had to be earned through usefulness. I don't live for that girl anymore. I responded to Danielle's email. Thanks for reaching out. I'm booked the next few months, but wishing Ava and the family all the best. Professional, polite, cold. Jake's text. I told him I don't take last-minute orders from clients or family, and Mom. I did stop by. One last time. She had baked a lemon loaf. It sat on the counter like a peace offering. The smell was wrong, too much extract, not enough zest. But the effort, I noticed it. We talked about safe things. The weather, the neighbors, her garden. Then she asked, "Why don't you ever bring your cakes around here?" I looked up from my tea. "Because you only want them now that they're valuable? When I first started, you wouldn't even taste them." She bristled. "That's not fair." "It is. You told me baking was a waste. That I needed a real job. That no man would want a woman with flour under her nails. That was a different time." "No, Mom. It was me who was different. You just couldn't see past your version of success." She looked at me like I was someone she didn't recognize. Maybe I wasn't. "Do you hate us now?" "I don't," I said softly. "But I don't live for your approval anymore, either." The silence that followed was thick, heavy with decades of unspoken things. Then she asked, "Was it worth it?" I didn't have to think. Every burnt tray, every sleepless night, every friend who showed up when you didn't. Because it wasn't just about the bakery, it was about me. Building something from nothing. Proving to myself that I was not small, or silly, or forgettable. That night, I drove home and opened my laptop. A new order had come in. It wasn't from a celebrity, or a rich client. It was from Clara, the girl who used to take my beginner cake classes every Tuesday, who stayed late just to ask about piping tips, whose hands always trembled when she tried to hold a decorating bag. She wrote, "Hi Rachel, I finally saved up enough for my mom's 60th. I want you to make her cake. You taught me more than how to bake. You taught me to believe I was capable. Thank you for seeing me before I could see myself." Claire, I stared at the screen, tears blurring the words. This was the kind of connection I built my bakery on. The kind that didn't care about nameplates, or social capital, or family politics, just heart. Let me tell you something hard. Sometimes, the people who love you conditionally will try to re-enter your life once you've proven your worth. They'll pretend they always believed in you. They'll wrap their pride in compliments and call it love. But it's okay to say no. It's okay to hold the door, but not open it all the way. Not everyone deserves to be part of your success story, just because they share your last name. And not every wound needs to be healed through reunion. Some just need boundaries. A few weeks later, I was asked to speak at a local businesswomen's conference. The topic: turning doubt into fuel. I stood on stage in front of 300 strangers and told them the truth, that I built my business not in the warmth of support, but in the cold shadows of ridicule. That I learned to decorate cakes while swallowing shame at family dinners. That every time someone told me you're being dramatic or you're not thinking realistically, I folded that pain into batter and made something beautiful. They clapped. Some cried. And I walked off stage feeling taller than I ever had, not because I was applauded, but because I was finally, fully myself, unedited, undiminished, undeniable. If you're someone chasing a dream that your family can't see, keep going, even if they laugh, even if they walk away, because one day, they'll want a seat at your table, and you get to choose who eats with you. You know what irony tastes like? It tastes like the silence on the other end of the phone when I told Aunt Lorraine we were fully booked for the next 4 months and, yes, that included her grandson's birthday. It tastes like the disbelief in Ava's voice when she asked me, "Wait, you don't do family discounts?" And I told her I didn't even do friend discounts anymore. Because here's the thing, when you've been devalued for so long, you learn to price your time like it's sacred. Because it is, and if they couldn't believe in me when my cupcakes were melting in the back of my rusty Corolla, then they sure as hell didn't earn the right to skip the waitlist now that my name was etched in gold above a storefront. Let me paint the picture for you. The bakery had gone viral, not once, 3 times. The salted caramel hummingbird cake was featured in a national bridal magazine. A celebrity posted my custom lemon thyme wedding tower on Instagram. And a food blogger with 5 million followers wrote, "If you haven't tried Rachel's cakes, you haven't lived." 300,000 followers. Booked out 3 months in advance. And yes, a velvet rope outside the shop on Saturdays because I'd started doing limited drop-ins and customers camped out for them. I was no longer Rachel the baker. I was Rachel the brand. But the most unexpected twist. The clients who once rolled their eyes when I handed them flyers at farmers markets were now asking for sponsorships. People who used to joke, "Oh, so you just do cakes," were suddenly reshaping their tone into reverence, and the family. Oh, they came crawling. One afternoon, my assistant Maddie poked her head into the kitchen. "Hey, there's someone at the counter," said. "She's your cousin." I wiped my hands on my apron, half expecting a casual drop dash by Dot instead. It was Danielle. She looked nervous, out of place among the crystal cake stands and white marble floors. "I brought a friend," she said. "She's opening a boutique and thought it'd be cool if you did, like maybe pastries for her grand opening." I blinked. "Danielle, I haven't seen you since your bridal shower. When I wasn't even invited to the wedding." She stammered. "It wasn't personal. We had a small guest list. You invited half the county and still didn't include me," I said quietly. "And then God help me," I smiled. "But don't worry. The waitlist's on the website. If she wants a cake, she can book like everyone else." That moment, that was sweeter than anything I'd ever baked, not because I got to reject her, no, because I didn't need her, because when she looked at me with that stunned, apologetic expression, I didn't feel small, or forgotten, or bitter. I felt free. Let's talk about success for a moment. It doesn't always look like money in the bank or magazine features. Sometimes, it's a quiet morning in your kitchen, just you, a bowl of batter, and a playlist you love. Sometimes, it's being able to say no without guilt. Sometimes, it's realizing you're no longer trying to prove anything to anyone, because somewhere along the way, I stopped baking out of pain. I started baking out of joy. There was one more confrontation I didn't see coming. Mom, she came by the shop a week before her birthday, didn't call ahead, just walked in, as if she'd never once said, "Cakes don't pay the bills." I saw her standing in front of the display case, staring at the Triple Air Earl Grey chiffon with lavender buttercream. She looked small. "You've built something beautiful," she said. I nodded. I did. Silence. Then, "Do you ever miss us?" I didn't dodge the question. "I missed the version of us I thought we could be," I said. "But I don't miss the reality of always being the disappointment." She flinched, and I hated that it still gave me a pang. "I want to try," she said. "I want to know you again." I sighed. "I believe you. But this time, you have to do it on my terms." "What does that mean?" "It means you don't get a free cake just because we share blood. You don't get a shortcut into my life just because you regret missing the best parts. If you want a relationship, it has to be real, not seasonal, not when it's convenient. We sat down. I poured her a cup of my vanilla chai blend, the same one I used to sip alone, wondering if I'd ever make it out of that basement apartment. She cried when she tasted it. This tastes like home. I looked at her and said, that's because I built home, Mom. From scratch. Let me ask you something. If you're still listening, what do you owe to the people who only want to claim you once you're shining? What's your price for peace? Because if I've learned anything, it's this. You don't owe anyone your success. Not your loyalty. Not your discounts. Not your time. You earned your light. Don't dim it to make others comfortable in the shadows they chose to stand in. The bakery's slogan is still printed in gold across our boxes, made with everything they said I lacked. And every time a customer opens one, I hope they taste not just sugar and spice but resistance, reclamation, and a woman who didn't just rise. She rose. It's funny once the applause fades. Once the line outside your bakery becomes a norm instead of a miracle, the real work begins. Not the mixing, not the baking, but the boundary setting. Because success doesn't automatically come with armor. You have to build it, slice by slice, layer by layer. The same way you'd build a cake that won't collapse under pressure. And I had pressure from everywhere. Old classmates, who'd never spoken a word to me in school, suddenly deeming me for collabs. My cousins acting like they'd always believed in me, when I still had voice memos of them laughing at my GoFundMe. Even distant uncles asking if I could mentor their daughters, usually right after suggesting I open a second shop in their neighborhood. But the worst, the family dinners. God, those used to hurt. They became a sort of stage, where everyone tried to rewrite their own role in my story. Suddenly, they were all supportive from the start. Suddenly, they knew I was going to make it, and I sat there, wine glass in hand, wondering if any of them actually remembered what they really said when I told them I wanted to bake full-time. Spoiler, I remembered every word. It's a cute hobby, Rachel, but it's not a career. You're too soft. You'll never survive in business. No man wants a woman covered in flour every day. Now, they wanted tips on entrepreneurship, recipes, contacts, influence, and for a while I gave in. Because it felt like a small price for peace, but peace bought at the cost of your dignity. That's not peace, that's a performance. One night, I came home after a brutal week. We'd just signed a deal to supply a regional hotel chain, a huge win, but I felt hollow because that week, my brother Nate had sent his third email requesting just a couple cakes for his fiancée's bridal shower. No payment. No acknowledgement of the work. Just assumption. And I'd said yes again. That night, I cried over buttercream, not because I was sad, but because I was furious at myself for letting them take. Again, the next morning, I changed everything. I sat at my desk and wrote a letter. A real one. Printed and mailed that to my entire family. I love you, but I will no longer bake for free. I will no longer make exceptions to the wait list. I will no longer smile through dismissive jokes or tolerate subtle jabs about getting lucky. If you want a relationship with me, let it be real, not transactional, not nostalgic, and definitely not entitled. Some didn't reply. Some sent snarky texts, but some, the ones who mattered, reached out with sincerity. Uncle James called and said, "You're right. I treated you like a backup singer in your own song. I'm sorry." Even Mom started sending me texts, not about events or favors but just to check in. Just to say hi. It wasn't about punishing them, it was about reteaching them how to treat me. And the more I stood tall, the less I needed their validation. I found peace in my own rhythm. I'd wake up at 5 a.m., sip my coffee in silence, and watch the morning light pour into the kitchen. I started mentoring to teen girls from the local shelter, taught them how to measure flour, how to fold egg whites gently, how to believe in themselves. They didn't have much, but they had fire. Just like I did. I saw parts of myself in them, the fear, the hope, the hunger to be seen. And every Friday, they'd leave with a box of pastries and a little more confidence than they came with. You want to know the real victory? It wasn't the TV segment I filmed. It wasn't even when I was asked to judge a national baking competition. It was when I overheard a little girl in my shop whisper to her mom, "When I grow up, I want to be like her. Not pretty, not perfect, not polished, just powerful in her own kitchen. On her own terms." I've learned that sometimes, the most radical thing you can do is not perform your pain. Let it rise into something beautiful instead. Let your boundaries be your protection, not a punishment, but a preservation, because there's a version of you come whole. undisturbed by the opinions of people who once scoffed at your dreams, waiting on the other side of no. No, I won't minimize myself. No, I won't explain away my worth. No, you don't get to rewrite how you treated me, but yes, I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I do die. I am not the family's afterthought anymore. I'm not the punchline. I'm not the compromise. I'm not the quiet girl with flour on her face, hoping for someone to say she matters. I know I matter, because I built something that outlasted every laugh, every doubt, every rolled eye. And no one gets to take that from me. It was a Wednesday in early spring, blue skies, soft breeze, tulips blooming on the windowsill of the shop. I was kneeling to pipe a row of peonies on a birthday cake when I saw my father's reflection in the glass door. I thought it was a trick of the light, but then the bell above the door rang, and there he was. Real, solid, out of place in his stiff suit, holding his car keys like a shield. He hadn't stepped foot into my bakery since it opened. Not once, not even during the press tours, not even when Mom came. So I straightened up, wiped my hands on my apron, and met his eyes. "Dad," I said, steady. He blinked as if I'd caught him off guard. "You single quotes. Really busy, huh?" It wasn't a question, just an observation. Like he didn't know how to start a real conversation. I nodded. Yes, fully booked through July. He looked around the shop at the racks of pastries, the warm lighting, the handwritten thank you notes taped to the counter. He let out a soft, almost disbelieving chuckle. "I used to say you wouldn't make rent past the third month." I didn't answer. I just stood there, letting silence do the work my words couldn't. He stepped closer, then rested his hand on the countertop, tapping his fingers. "I was wrong," he said, and then it happened. Something I had imagined 100 ways, rehearsed in the quiet corners of my mind, twisted into 1,000 versions of confrontation and closure, but none of them felt quite like this, because he didn't just apologize. He cracked. "I didn't know how to support you," he said quietly. "When you said you were leaving your job to open a bakery, I was terrified. Not for you, for me. That it meant I hadn't raised you right, that you'd fail, and it'd be on my shoulders." He paused. His voice broke in the middle of the next sentence. I didn't laugh because I thought it was funny. I laughed because I didn't want to cry. And just like that, the fire I had kept stoked for years cooled into something else, not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. I'd spent so long waiting for him to admit he was wrong, to acknowledge the harm, but I hadn't prepared myself for the vulnerability beneath his control. He looked up at me, older than I remembered, softer than I expected. "I don't expect anything," he said. "I just wanted to see it. See what you built." With my own eyes. I told him he could stay. I poured him a cup of the house blend, and we sat in the corner booth, him hunched like he didn't belong, me upright like I finally did. We didn't talk much. But that was okay. Sometimes silence is its own kind of conversation. He took a bite of the almond croissant, then another, and another. By the third bite, his eyes were glossy. "I used to think pastries were frivolous," he said, voice low. "But this tastes like you mean it." That night, I didn't cry. Not from sadness, not from anger, not even from release. I just sat on my back porch with a glass of wine, watching the moon climb the sky, and realized I was no longer chasing approval. Not from him, not from anyone. The confrontation had come and gone, and I was still me, whole, grounded, fierce. In the weeks that followed, things shifted. My family didn't transform overnight. No grand gesture. No epiphany montage, but the jab stopped. The assumptions faded. The entitlement vanished. They started to ask instead of expect. To listen instead of instruct. I don't think it was just about the bakery. I think it was the way I carried myself. I had stopped begging for love, and that made all the difference. But there was one moment weeks later that undid me. I was walking down Main Street with a box of mini strawberry tarts when I passed a group of college girls, seated at a cafe. One of them pointed at me. "That's her. That's Rachel Monroe. From Bloom Bakehouse." They whispered and giggled. Then one called out, "We waitlisted for our birthday cake 3 months in advance. Totally worth it." I laughed, thanked them, and walked on. And as I rounded the corner, I thought, if only the girl I used to be could see me now. The one who made cupcakes in a leaky apartment kitchen while her sister rolled her eyes from the hallway. She'd probably smile, maybe cry, but mostly, she'd stand up straighter. I still bake every morning. Still scrub down mixers by hand. Still double-check every flavor note. still write messages on cakes, like you did it, babe. Or we believe in you, because every cake is a message and every message is a love letter to the girl I used to be, the one they underestimated, the one they dismissed, the one who rose anyway. I didn't chase publicity. I didn't call the papers, pitch my story to lifestyle magazines, or beg for viral fame. I was too busy kneading dough and icing cakes to think about PR, but somehow they found me. It started with a food blogger, a woman in her late 20s who came in on a whim because her Tinder date stood her up at the cafe across the street. She ordered a lavender honey scone to go with her sadness and ended up staying 2 hours to try everything else. She wrote a blog post titled, "I got ghosted and found the best bakery in the city instead." It blew up. Suddenly, I had new customers flooding in with screenshots and hashtags. The post was shared by a local magazine, then picked up by a regional lifestyle outlet. Then a TV crew reached out. They wanted to feature Bloom Bakehouse on their Women Who Built It series. When I saw the email, I stared at it for almost a full minute before I even breathed. Part of me still didn't believe I deserved it. Another part, quieter, but stronger, whispered, "You do. You built this." They filmed the segment over 2 days. Interviewed me while I decorated an engagement cake. Shot B-roll of me consulting with clients, laughing with customers, hugging my team. They asked about my story, my real story. And for the first time, I told it. I didn't sugarcoat the early years. The family dinners where I was the punchline. The tears I cried over empty savings and burnt caramel. The quiet, bruised hope I had clung to when everyone else treated my dream like a joke. I said. On camera. They laughed when I said I'd open a bakery. Now they have to book 3 months in advance just to get a birthday cake. The producer gave me a thumbs up behind the lens. When the episode aired, the shop exploded. Not just orders - recognition. People came in just to say, "Thank you for telling that story." I felt every word. Some said they were starting over at 40. Others whispered they had always wanted to create something of their own but had been talked out of it. A teenager hugged me and cried into my apron, saying, "My mom says I'll never be more than average. But seeing you makes me want to prove her wrong." And in those moments, I realized this bakery wasn't just about bread and sugar and butter. It was about dignity. About proving something, not just to them, but to yourself. Of course. My family saw the segment. My sister texted me at "Wow, nice feature," that reeked of forced civility. My mother called. "I didn't realize it was that hard for you," she said. There was no apology in her tone. Just confusion. Like the story contradicted her version of our family. "I never thought you'd take all that so seriously," she added. I didn't answer right away. Because I had taken it seriously. The jabs, the disregard, the subtle humiliations that build up like rust inside your bones. But instead of defending myself, I asked her one thing. "Would you have treated me the same if I'd said I wanted to be a lawyer?" She didn't answer. And that silence said everything. There was a family party, not long after. A cousin's graduation. My invitation arrived late, probably an afterthought, but I went anyway. Not to show off, not to prove anything, but to observe, to test whether the dynamics had shifted, or if they were just better at hiding the scorn now that I was successful. I wore a tailored blazer over a linen dress, brought a lemon elderflower tart, and arrived 10 minutes late because, honestly, I could. My sister greeted me with a tight-lipped smile. My aunts whispered compliments that tasted like artificial sweetener. And my uncle made a smug joke. "So, can I finally get a free cake now that you're rich?" I smiled politely and said, "Sure, after you book online like everyone else." The whole table went quiet. And I didn't shrink. I just took a bite of my own tart and let the silence grow legs. Later that evening, my cousin pulled me aside. "She told everyone you'd fail. You know," she whispered, nodding toward my sister. "Said you were playing house with flour." I looked her straight in the eyes and said, she was right about one thing I was playing. But I turned it into an empire. The power shift was slow but permanent. People who once talked at me began speaking to me, not because they'd changed their hearts, but because I no longer gave them access to mine. They could no longer reach in and rearrange my self-worth with a shrug or a sigh or a dismissive chuckle. I had barricaded that part of myself with bricks, made of buttercream and belief. Success didn't fix everything, but it changed the rules. I no longer needed their permission to feel proud, no longer needed their apology to know I was owed one. Their approval had become background noise in a room where I now controlled the mic. And if you're reading this or watching this, hoping for that same moment, let me tell you something. You don't need to become famous to be free. You just need to stop begging for love from people who ration it out like it's a reward. You don't need a camera crew to make your pain valid. You don't need a wait list to make your dream real. You just need to start. Start ugly. Start small. Start anyway. Because once the spotlight finds you, they'll pretend they always believed in you, and you'll know better. It's funny how people rewrite history, now that Bloom Bakehouse is a name whispered with reverence on local lists, in upscale magazines. Even mentioned on a travel show, they act like they always knew I had it in me. My uncle tells people, that's my niece. We always said she was the one with the spark. My mother proudly brings up my bakery at church luncheons, says things like, she got her work ethic from me. As if the years of silence and side eyes never happened. Even my father, who once laughed so hard at my business idea he spilled beer down his shirt, now refers to me as my daughter, the entrepreneur, with a puffed chest and a glint of ownership in his eye. But I remember the Christmas Eve when I offered to bring dessert and was told, let your sister handle the food, hers is always presentable. I remember them calling my cake orders a cute hobby when I was taking on 3 weddings in one weekend and losing sleep to deliver perfection. I remember being the family's afterthought until I became its trophy. So no, I don't owe them the sweet ending. I don't owe them forgiveness just because their tone changed. I don't owe them a seat at my table just because I finally have one worth sitting at. They had their chance to support me when I was nothing but flour on my sleeves and dreams in my eyes. They passed. And yet, I'm not bitter, not anymore. Because I didn't succeed in spite of them, I succeeded away from them. There's a difference. Spite is a fire that burns quick and bright. Kit can power you through dark nights, sure, but it leaves ash. What truly sustained me wasn't revenge, it was vision. Quiet, stubborn vision. The kind you nurture in silence while everyone else laughs. The kind that doesn't need validation, it needs space. I found people who gave me that space. A landlord who gave me a chance with a lease no one else would touch. A retired baker who taught me to temper chocolate like a pro. A group of girlfriends who volunteered to help with my first Valentine's rush when my assistant called out sick. And most of all, customers who believed with their wallets and their taste buds and their word of mouth. They were my fuel, not the people who share my last name. The bakery kept growing. We opened a second location, uptown, then a production kitchen, then a storefront in another city. I started mentoring young women who wanted to build something of their own. Bakers, artisans, dreamers. Most of them had been laughed at too. I told them what I wish someone had told me years ago. Don't waste your energy trying to prove yourself to people who've already decided not to see you. Let your success speak for you, let it sing. My brother reached out last month, the one who once told me I'd never survive in business because I was too emotional. He wanted a job, said he was tired of corporate life, that he admired what I'd built, that maybe I had a spot for him admin operations, something stable. He even ended the email with, I know I've said some things in the past, but family is family, right? I sat with that email for 3 days, drafted responses, deleted them, wrote again, paused. Finally, I replied, I appreciate you reaching out. I hope you find the clarity and career you're looking for, but Bloom Bakehouse isn't just a job, it's my lifeblood. I protect what I've built with everything I have. And right now, that doesn't include making space for people who only show up when it's convenient. He didn't reply. And that's okay. There's a power in saying no. No to emotional blackmail, disguised as reconciliation. No to rewriting the past for the comfort of others. No to letting people skip the hard chapters just to enjoy the happy ending. Forgiveness doesn't mean access. I can let go of the bitterness I have, but I don't have to reopen the door to people who only knocked when the scent of success wafted through the keyhole. I threw a party last weekend, 10 years of Bloom. Bakehouse. We rented a garden space with fairy lights and music and long tables of food. My whole team came. So did their families, our vendors, our regulars, and even some of the brides whose weddings I baked for back in the early days. I gave a little speech, talked about resilience, about failure, about how every great cake starts with chaos, flour flying, eggs cracking, heat rising. And I ended it with this: you don't need a perfect kitchen to make something beautiful, just heart and hunger. And people who see you, even before the frosting sets. They stood and clapped. And somewhere deep in my chest, That last shard of old pain finally melted into gratitude. I never did get that apology. But I no longer need it, because my life speaks louder than their silence ever could. And the sweetest thing I ever made wasn't a cake. It was the version of me that rose when no one thought she would. There's something strange that happens when the world starts clapping for you. Not out of politeness, not because they're supposed to, but because they finally see you. They see the hours you never bragged about, the messes you cleaned in silence, the victories you celebrated alone at 2 a.m. with nothing but the hum of your fridge and the sticky scent of sugar on your apron. They see it and for a moment. The world is quieter, kinder, truer, but here's the truth they don't tell you. Recognition doesn't fix the wound, it doesn't make up for the birthdays you baked cakes for everyone else while nobody remembered yours, it doesn't reverse the way your mother said, "Let your sister go first, she's the responsible one." It doesn't erase that lump in your throat when your father looked past you at dinner to ask your brother how his job was going. No amount of applause rewrites those silences, but it does make you sit taller, not because you need their approval, but because you no longer confuse love with permission. I was invited to speak at a small business conference in Chicago. Keynote, they said. I laughed at first. I'm not a speaker. I'm a baker. But I went. I stood on a stage in a navy dress, lights in my eyes, palms sweating. And I told them what I wish someone had told me. You don't have to be taken seriously. To start, you just have to be willing to look ridiculous long enough for your results to do the talking. The audience was full of strangers, but they nodded like they knew. Because they did. People don't succeed in silence because they want to. They do it because they've been dismissed too many times to waste breath explaining their vision, and still, they rise, like dough under the right heat. Sometimes, I see my family's name pop up on our online reservation list. They've never made it past the wait list, 3 months in advance. That's the demand, and I'll be honest, part of me used to watch those names pop up and wait for them to call me, to ask for a favor, to say, could you squeeze us in? They never did. Pride, I suppose. The same pride that made them laugh in my face now keeps them silent in my shadow. Poetic, really, but I don't linger on it anymore. I don't bake for applause, but I hear it anyway in the hum of my ovens. In the way the front door bells ring, like music. In the messages from customers saying my cake tasted like home. That's the applause that matters. This morning, I opened the bakery at sunrise. The lights clicked on, casting a soft gold across the counters. I brewed the first pot of coffee, rolled up my sleeves, and pulled out the sourdough starter like I do every Thursday. There's peace in repetition, the quiet rhythm of creation. People think success is some dramatic crescendo, but sometimes, it's just the moment you realize you're no longer waiting for someone to give you permission to feel proud. You just are. A little girl walked in with her mom just before opening, maybe 7 years old, clutching a napkin with a crayon drawing of a cake. Is this something you can make? The mom asked. I bent down and looked her in the eyes. She had paint smudged on her cheek and glitter in her braids. Sweetheart, I said, if you can dream it, I can bake it. Her face lit up. I took the napkin. It had uneven layers and a candy cane rainbow dripping off the side. A cake that defied symmetry, logic, and gravity. I smiled, because that used to be me. You see, this wasn't just a story about baking. It was never just about flour and eggs and ovens. It was about becoming, about standing up when you've been pushed aside, about choosing belief over bitterness, about building something that doesn't just feed people, but reminds them that they matter. Even when no one claps. Especially then. To anyone out there nursing a quiet dream. To anyone who's been laughed at by the people who were supposed to love them first. To anyone who's waiting for a sign to begin. Let this be it. Your story doesn't need applause to be powerful. It just needs you.